Welcome back, everybody. Our third summit session, Rethinking the Bay Delta, Restoration with Benefits, asks the question, what will smarter management of California's Bay Delta mean for water supplies here in Southern California? Our panelists will discuss the latest research conducted by the San Francisco Estuary Institute and the Metropolitan Water District. Please welcome to the stage the moderator, Steve Faessel, board member of the Metropolitan Water District, Emily Corwin, Director of Strategic Initiatives of San Francisco Estuary Institute, Randall, I think it's Neudeck, Manager of Bay Delta Programs for the Metropolitan Water District, and consultant and Delta expert, Curt Schmutte of Curt Schmutte Consulting. Schmutte, I beg your pardon. If I knew you were so famous, I would have figured the... Anyway, give him a round of applause if you would, folks. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, what's with the Voss? I thought this was supposed to be groundwater replenishment water. Okay, where's Sheldon? Sheldon. Anyway, have we had some great conversations this morning or what? Wow. That Darcy Burke. Yes, indeed. She comes to every Met meeting and makes sure that we listen very, very carefully. So Fritz, thank you very much for introducing us. My name is Steve Faessel, and I'm a MWD board director representing the city of Anaheim. Anaheim is one of Metropolitan's first original 13 golden cities going back to 1928. So we've seen a lot of changes in Southern California in almost 98 years. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my friends at the city of Anaheim who are kind of over there somewhere. And I saw some of my friends from OC San where I did a 4-year term here recently. So it's nice to see you all here today. Anaheim has been always a big supporter of these educational opportunities. I'm very, very honored to be here. And I'm thrilled, really, to be the moderator for this. We've seen a lot of concern expressed up here this morning, and maybe we'll hear a little bit of good news. My team here has guaranteed me that, hey, we have some good news. So we'll be sharing some really, really good information, rethinking the Bay Delta restoration with benefits. That's quite a handful as a title. As a 10-year Met director, I've been on several inspection trips and through this Delta, the state and the Delta, and have been involved in a number of important policy discussions about state water project issues, and boy, does Met have a lot on their plate right now, which we'll hear a little bit about. The Bay Delta Estuary is one of the most studied and important parts of the California water system. As a matter of fact, you've heard about it today, and I think you saw a map here just a moment ago. Bay Delta is kind of the locus of California water, and what we do here in Southern California is very dependent upon what happens in the Delta, so we'll hear more about that. And it's not often that you can say that you're introducing a new project that might actually be good for the environment as well as good for our water supply. And if you want to hear about this proposal that will benefit us and give us hopefully 100,000 acre feet of new water, I think we're going to hear about that today. So let me introduce the panel. And first we'll go through some initial questions, and then hopefully we'll have enough time for some questions from the audience. I know they kind of snuck through here on the last group and didn't, but I'll try to do my best here. First, I'd like to introduce Emily Corwin, and you've heard a little bit about her earlier. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the San Francisco Estuary Institute. Now, she's a civil engineer with over 20 years of experience leading collaborations to develop water and climate resilience projects in the Bay and the Delta and the Sushan March, as well as her work internationally. Now, while we just met a little bit ago, I hope that we all have met a new friend today. So let's see. Next is, I'll introduce Randall Neudeck. He is MWD's director of the Bay Delta programs. He has over 4 decades in this business. That's a long time. 4 decades of experience in water supply and environmental issues in both the eastern and western Sierras. I worked with Randall closely when I vice chaired the Met's Bay Delta committee, and I can attest to his deep knowledge of this area. So welcome, Randall. Next we have Curt Schmutte. Curt has 37 years of Delta and Sushan Marsh experience, working on a wide variety of projects and programs, including, and I have to read these all, levees, seismic risk, land subsidence, which we heard a little bit about earlier, ecosystem habitat, which we'll hear about, I'm sure, floating marshes, which is his expertise, salinity modeling, and emergency response planning. Wow, you're going to cover all of those, Curt? Oh, okay, well, that'll take 45 minutes. Okay, and he's also served as an expert witness on several Delta court cases. And of course, there's one thing we can always be guaranteed, are Delta court cases, right? And it's doubtful that there's a square yard of the Delta that Curt hasn't not studied or more properly waded through at some years in the north. So welcome, Curt. And so let's get started. I will start off with a sort of a first question, and I think I'll give this question to Randall. The first question is, Randall, can you provide some background on the current policies of the Delta and the Sushan Marsh? And can you talk about MWD's investments in the Delta, which is a big thing for MWD and may not be generally known to the audience here. And can you tell us about what you see as the future of our water supply framework?
Thank you, Director Faessel. And the nice thing is you're the third panel. The bad thing is it changes up what you're going to talk about a lot of the times. But as Director Faessel sits on our board, and I have, at last count, there's 8 board members in the room. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit is adding to what they stated on the last panel, but also give you a little positive things. So in the last panel, they talked about water supply, the need for abundance. And from a Metropolitan standpoint, when I look at it, I used to look at, 30 years ago, and if you're a general manager of a member agency or Metropolitan Water District, you really didn't have to worry about water supply reliability. We had local supplies. We had the State Water Project that was always reliable. We always got 100% or 90% of our supplies. And then if it did happen to go down to 75%, we had the Colorado River to back us up. So the question of reliability wasn't that bad. We still planned new projects and stuff. 20 years ago, then it started to seeing the State Water Project went down. It would go up and down, but it was only down to about as low as 40%. That's when Jeff Keitlinger had to start looking into also on the Colorado River. We had to start giving back some of those waters because we were using too much. Now let's talk about the last just 4 or 5 years here in Southern California. What we're seeing is the state project, which they mentioned on the previous panel, is down to it's been down as low as 5%, and the next year up to 100, up and down reliability. And on the Colorado River, we're seeing increased need or potential increase in environmental water there. The amount of water available that they originally planned under the 1922 compact isn't being realized there. So the possibility of losing additional supplies on the Colorado River is real as well. So the question is, how can you be positive on this? Does Metropolitan have a plan? And we do have a plan. We have people studying working on both the Colorado River, local supplies, and on the Bay Delta. And we have actually, I've heard some of our directors say, you have too many water supply projects out there. You have your member agency projects that are looking at groundwater, regional recycling, conservation. You have those same projects at Metropolitan, plus storage we're looking at south of the Delta. We have new storage we're looking at and Sites Reservoir north of the Delta with new water rights. We have the regional pure water program. And then at the full state water contractor level, you have the Delta Conveyance Project. What our board is saying, though, is we need a better way to analyze these projects. In the past, we had an integrated resource plan. They want a more robust plan. How can we, and we called it, many of you probably heard, CAMP for Water, the Climate, if I get it right, Climate Adaptation Master Plan. And it's really a process at our board, we're not there yet, but we're trying to work this with our board and member agencies on how do we put these projects together. Because with all this water supply and certainly reliability, as Director Faessel said, we're at one of our lowest water sales in our history. I think you said 1974 levels.
Yes.
Yeah, 1970. So we have the low water sales, which means we're not bringing in as much money, and then the need to do these projects, which means we need to spend money out there. So this Camp for Water process will be a way which we can look at, not just having the board vote up or down on some of these big multi-million, if not billion-dollar projects, but can we space them out over time? Which ones are easy to implement in today's climate, political climate and environmental climate, and which ones will be harder and we have to push off into the future. One of the projects we're bringing that to you today, and Emily and Curt are going to describe it. It's a concept that I know Curt and others have been working on for a number of years, but we're kind of bringing it out here. You've heard it could produce significant water, 100,000 acre feet. That's what, 2 desal plants. And I've seen the modeling up to 200,000 possibly as well. So we're really excited to bring this project to you and have it discussed here today. And it's a concept project right now. It hasn't even been brought to the Metropolitan Board, but it's something I think is very interesting, and you'll hear more about it.
Thanks, Randall. Well, that kind of is a great lead-in to Curt, I think.
Your graphic.
And so, Curt, let's hear about your discussion about. Oops. Oh, you have a video? Okay, here, please.
Go get started. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, we got to go back to that prior graphic if you can. Thank you. That one. So, again, I'm Curt Schmutte, and I've been working in the Bay Delta for 37 years and worked on a whole host of projects. And I have to say, what I'm going to present to you today is the most exciting, important project that I've ever dealt with in 37 years. As you've heard, the Delta is extremely important to Southern California's water supply, the state's water supply, and we've had these restrictions and declining exports out of the Delta. One of the things we've been trying to do for a number of years is to come up with projects that are real win-win projects, projects that can help the ecosystem, help the water supply, and work with all of the different stakeholders. So I'm going to show you a 4-minute animation, but because some of this gets a little complex, I'm going to first give you some background information on 3 subjects. First, salinity intrusion. It's a big deal in the Delta. I'm going to talk about habitat, and finally, our favorite fish, the Delta smelt. So I'm going to give you a briefing on our Delta smelt. So if you look at this map, the right-hand side is fresh. The left-hand side is salty. So as you go out to the bay, that's seawater. If you're in the Delta, that's fresh. And one of the things we try to do is to repel. We're constantly under balance conditions. We're trying to repel that salt and push it back out. We're releasing water from the reservoirs to push the salt back out to the ocean. That's number 1. Number 2, this is a tidal estuary. It's not a river system. If you're fishing in the Delta and you lose your cooler, you don't panic. You wait 6 hours and it comes back to you. It may not have all the beer, but it'll come back to you. So this is an estuary dominated by the tides. We have 2 high tides and 2 low tides that come in, and the tides will move in as much as 6 miles one way and 6 miles back out the other way. That induces mixing into the system. There's a volume of water that moves in every 6 hours and a volume of water that moves back out. So the volume and the tides are what cause mixing to mix into the delta. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because what I'm going to show you is some brand new modeling that indicates that by fixing the Sassoon Marsh, restoring tidal marsh habitat, we can actually greatly reduce the amount of mixing into the delta. And that means we can save a lot of water. That's number one. Number two, when we look at our ecosystem and our fish in particular are starved. Our estuary is the most starved estuary probably in the world. We have lost over 98% of the aquatic food supply that once existed in the delta. And we wonder why our delta smelt and our salmon and our other native fish populations aren't thriving, because they're not getting enough food. If you do an autopsy on a delta smelt or a salmon, one of the things you see is that they're clearly not getting enough food. We need to generate more food. The first principle of ecology is habitat. We've lost 98% of the habitat. This is a project that can restore a vast amount of habitat back into the system, a vast amount of food supply. If we can restore populations of our endangered fish species, delta smelt and salmon, the goal is to reduce our restrictions on water supply pumping. If we can change the take limits, reduce the restrictions, that's more water. So not only does this project change the mixing, but it also has a potential to change these take limits that restrict pumping. And finally, delta smelt. This animation I'm going to show you, and I'll walk through this in a minute. Right now, we release a significant amount of water, hundreds of thousands of acre feet, to this little fish that you probably all hear about that smells like a cucumber. I bet you didn't know that. So our delta smelt used to be much larger. They're about 20% smaller than they used to be because of a lack of food supply. We release water into this zone, and I'm going to jump down over here. So this area right here, and I apologize, this is the mixing zone. That's where the fresh and the salt water mix. That's where delta smelt hang out. The adults hang out for the better part of their life history. We release water to maintain this 2 part per thousand salinity in that mixing zone to encourage delta smelt populations. However, all that is based on correlations. And my favorite saying is correlations are not causation. For decades, we've been releasing large amounts of water in the name of protecting delta smelt based on correlations. For the first time ever, I'm going to present to you today, we now know why these delta smelt are hanging out in the low salinity zone. I get excited. So with that little bit of background, let's go ahead and play the animation, and I'll try to narrate for you. And hopefully this plays. Yes. So we're now flying from the San Francisco Bay. That is the Sassoon Marsh. Those are duck clubs. Currently, most of the Sassoon Marsh, some 50,000 acres of duck clubs. As we're going to show some particles of salt, and as you see under existing conditions, those particles of salt go up 6 miles, they come back 6 miles, and they don't end up in the same spot in which they started. That's mixing. That's how salt gets into the delta. Now we're going to zoom into the Sassoon Marsh. All these duck clubs. Let's say we just pretend we've converted all of these duck clubs to a tidal marsh. So good for fish, lots of fish food, phytoplankton, zooplankton. These marshes are going to fill and then drain. So that fish food is going to be exported out into the channel. The delta smelt salmon can go in and feed. The food comes out in, and some of that food gets exported down into this mixing zone. Now you're going to see, as we zoom out of the Sassoon Marsh, this restored marsh, you're going to see how that has affected mixing in the mixing zone, how salinity mixing is reduced. So you see the particles don't move up as far, they don't move back as far, they end up more bunched together than when the pre-project condition. That mechanism saves a lot of water. So we're going to go fast forward into the future. We're going to talk about sea level rise. This Public Policy Institute has said by the end of the century, the delta is going to be too salty to use as a water supply. By doing these kinds of restoration, we can have a significant impact on salinity intrusion. How does this work? By increasing the volume of tidal water going into the Sassoon Marsh versus the delta, we're going to reduce the amount of water flow into the delta, and therefore we're going to reduce the amount of mixing. That's the second point here is with restoration, we're going to improve fish habitat. So we're going to provide fish food, zooplankton, phytoplankton, detrital matter, carbon. That fish food is then going to end up out in the mixing zone where the delta smelt like to hang out. Salmon, on the other hand, can come in and use these tidal marshes to grow big and fat and happy. Right now, we try to move the salmon through the delta because it's a killing zone. By doing this kind of restoration, we can give the salmon a place to grow and rear. Now we're going to part 3. Some really cool science from the U.S. Geological Survey has shown that for many decades we've been releasing a bunch of water out into the mixing zone. And with the idea that it was enhancing these, what we call blooms of good phytoplankton, zooplankton habitat. What the USGS has discovered for the very first time, which is really, really exciting, is that we've probably been wasting a lot of water. We've been pushing a lot of water out the system because we had these correlations, not knowing the physical mechanism. What the U.S. Geological Survey has determined, based on some really good science, is that during the spring and the fall, there are periods of time when we get what are called weak tides, where we get a really strong flood tide coming into the delta and a very small ebb tide coming back out. What these combination of we call it a double pump, that is when the blooms occur, because we are allowing this stratification or separation to occur. Remember that salt water is heavier than fresh water, and if you slow the water down, it will separate. The salt water will sink to the bottom, the fresh water will float to the top, and what that does is it allows these phytoplankton to stay up above the clams in what we call the photic zone. We get these big blooms, and fish come in and start feeding. So 3 real parts to this project: restoration in the Sassoon Marsh that can have a big impact on how we repel salt, save water back into the estuary or back into the reservoirs. 2, that we can improve the fishery, which will have an impact not only on the overall ecosystem, but will have an impact on pumping restrictions. And 3, this idea of having to release a bunch of water to maintain what we call X2, or the low salinity zone for delta smelt. And all 3 of those can have a significant benefit to the ecosystem, to water supply, and I'm going to stop. So anyway, I can't emphasize that this is really exciting stuff, groundbreaking, brand new. You heard this morning in prior panels this talk about water shortages and long-term plans. This is a project we can implement fairly rapidly and get some immediate benefits. And it's a win-win project. We need to work with the duck clubs in the Sassoon Marsh. Some of the preliminary discussions seem to be favorable to work with them because they want to continue to hunt ducks, and we would like to improve the ecosystem. So there are probably ways that we can do that, and I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about the details.
So Emily, thank you very much. And Curt, by the way, when it says here that you are the Delta expert, indeed, you are the Delta expert, as you can all see. And if any of you out there have had the opportunity, the benefit of going on a State Water Project tour, likely Curt made a presentation to you. It's always wonderful. I can't think of a person that knows more about this area than, frankly, all three of the team members up here. Well, I think Curt, Emily gave you a really, really good lead in here. So you want to run with the rest of this?
Sure, that's great. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here with Curt and Randall and get to talk about the Sassoon Marsh. So I work for an organization called the San Francisco Estuary Institute, or SFEI, and we're a lot like the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SCWRP, in that we're a non-advocacy, nonprofit research institute. Our mission is to deliver visionary science so people can revitalize nature in their communities. And earlier this year, we completed a project that was 100% focused on this area, the Sassoon Marsh. And one of the things that we really focused on was looking at the historical conditions, the present conditions, and for the purpose of being able to inform future actions like what Curt is describing here. And with the end goal of trying to restore some of the lost function. So what do I mean by that? This map that you're seeing on the screen are two maps taken directly from that recently completed work. And it's zoomed in on this 116,000 acre area of the Sassoon Marsh. So this is, as kind of shown in the previous maps and the video, this is directly between San Francisco Bay proper and the Delta. And on your left, you're seeing this a map of the historical habitats. This is dating back to the early and mid 1800s. And then on your right, you're seeing the modern current habitats. And I mean, the striking difference here is this teal color, which is representing tidal marsh and the historical condition, is completely replaced, or almost completely replaced, on the right side with this kind of greenish color, which are now managed wetlands. And so historically, there were about 50,000 acres of tidal marsh. Curt gave a great explanation of this. 2 times a day, the water is basically flushing in and out of these wetlands. And then in the modern condition, there are levees or dikes that are surrounding these areas so that tidal fluctuation cannot go in and out. And the history is that these areas were initially levied off, starting in the 1800s for agriculture, a brief stint for dairy, and then to their current use, which is primarily managed for duck hunting. So there are 150 different private duck clubs that manage these wetlands for that purpose. And one of the unique things about Sassoon Marsh, and it really is unique, it is the largest remaining contiguous, so altogether intact, brackish water marsh on the west coast of North America. So brackish is that mixing zone where it's a mixture of salt and fresh. And the reason that it's still contiguous, that it's really intact, is primarily because of the duck clubs and their stewardship of the area and this culture and the tradition that they have, the community has, of duck hunting here. So it's a really unique place in the context of the Bay Area and within the San Francisco Estuary. And in terms of kind of thinking about the restoration, as Curt it kind of laid out this vision of restoring and returning a large part or all of that managed wetland that's currently duck clubs, primarily, to tidal marsh. What does that mean? And so what would that take? And there's 3 things I want to point out here. The first is around subsidence. So as soon as those areas were disconnected from the tidal flow, the elevation within those areas started to drop. And it's the same thing that you see in parts of the Delta, but what's in Sassoon Marsh is not near as extreme as the subsidence that's happening or has already happened in the central and western Delta. So, but it's still not as easy as breaking the levee and letting the tide come in, because those elevations are so low that it wouldn't restore the habitat that Curt mentioned is just so valuable for the species and for the flushing and the water quality, et cetera. And so to truly restore tidal marsh here is going to take an input of sediment. And sediment supply is something that we are already in very short supply of within the San Francisco Bay Area and within the estuary. So this kind of need to identify sediment sources, bring them to this area and place them is one of the challenges that this vision would need to be able to address. The second point I want to make is around wildlife habitat and benefits. So within the San Francisco estuary, Sassoon Marsh is a bit of a treasure. It's still intact. It's providing wildlife benefits for native and non-native species, for this waterfowl that the duck clubs are attracting. And I think, with the restoration to tidal marsh, we're restoring to native habitat, and so we will benefit native species, specifically some of the native fish, the longfin and delta smelt, green sturgeon, and particularly the outgoing salmon like Chinook. So there's definitely a benefit to habitat, to wildlife for restoring this area, but I just want to emphasize that the current condition is also within the region, within the context, already providing a great benefit. And then the third point is the scale. So right now, within the marsh, there is a plan that everyone's been working towards. It's a 30-year plan with the goal of restoring between 5,000 and 7,000 acres of tidal marsh. We're about halfway through and halfway to meeting that goal, and there's still about 20 years left to go. So this vision, the potential to restore 30,000, 40,000 acres of tidal marsh is significantly, almost 10 times what the current plan and vision are working towards. Another kind of, to set the scale of what this vision is, the largest tidal marsh restoration project that we actually have in, again, all of the west coast of North America is happening in the southern part of San Francisco Bay, the Salt Pond Restoration Project. And that's restoring 15,000 acres by 2050. And so this would be potentially 3 to 4 times that amount of restoration, tidal marsh restoration that's happening. So it's a really exciting vision, and thinking about all of the different ways that it could benefit water supply, habitat, water quality is definitely, I'm really grateful that the conversation and the idea is coming forward. So, yeah.
So, you can tell we haven't rehearsed this. One of the things that was said in my introduction that Metropolitan has been very proactive, and rightfully so, dealing with is this idea of floating marshes. The subject of subsidence, the delta is deeply subsided, Sassoon Marsh not nearly as much. So this idea that came about and Metropolitan jumped on and has been active is this idea of using floating marshes. The delta and Sassoon Marsh used to historically have large quantities of floating marshes. They're gone, but the idea, we've been actually able to recreate these things so that you don't have to have millions of cubic yards to restore tidal marshes. You could bring in floating marshes. And so one of the things that Metropolitan is doing on its 4 islands is beginning to propagate larger amounts of floating, of material that can be used as floating marshes. We could then bring that material into a Sassoon Marsh, jumpstart the reclamation, the restoration of a full-on tidal marsh, because these floating marshes drop their root system down 4 or 5 feet and will anchor and begin to trap sediment we think will provide, based on our research, will show that we're already starting to generate significant phytoplankton, zooplankton food. So it kind of jumps, it's a way to solve this shallow subsidence problem in the near term with floating marshes.
Randall, all of this is important to us in Southern California because, as it was mentioned many times, we're pushing a lot of water out the San Francisco Bay Bridge that might possibly be better used for, directed back to Southern California. And it was also mentioned that 50% of the water in the state of California goes for environmental. What I think I see here is we're trying to take this and find a way through science, current science, of helping the environment, and yet the benefit to us here in Southern California would be added water supply. So, Randall, I'm thinking in light of this, where would and again, we had a representative from the water contractors here today, what role do the water contractors play? I mean, this would be a fairly large-scale restoration project, and how would the water contractors seek regulatory changes? Because I'm sure there's regulations here that would have to be looked at. And again, we have this new science that we're seeing here today. So, and talk a little bit maybe about the MWD investments, because MWD has bought, a number of properties in the Delta that some of us out in the audience may not be aware of.
Thank you. The Delta obviously is the home of not only the biggest estuary in the West Coast, but it's also the water supply for 30 million, 40 million people? I don't know, California. So it's significant in that sense. And Metropolitan is just one of the water agencies that works up there. Obviously, we're a large one, but to do a project like this, we would need to work with the state contractors, with the federal contractors, with the environmental interests up there, and make it collaborative. And this is the type of project that is. This helps out the environment and is able to produce some water supply benefit at the same time. A lot of projects, that's a little harder to do, but this one is clear in that way. Metropolitan has invested in the Delta, not only from the science side. We have 2 or 3 scientists up there that work specifically, in addition to Curt, on Delta smelt issues, on salmon issues, on habitat issues. We help out the Estuary Institute in providing them some grants and other entities to assist us in this. Again, our reasons are because regulations, so if we can improve the species out there, it helps us reduce the amount of regulations on us, or at least keep them where they are and not add to them. And then in addition, we're trying to do some habitat restoration. A number of years ago, we worked with both the state and federal contractors to buy a portion of land actually out in the marsh called Thule Red. We restored that, and now that is actually open to tidal marsh restoration. We purchased some islands in the Delta. Now, those islands were initially purchased to assist in the Delta Conveyance Project. The Delta Conveyance Project, it was going to go right underneath those islands. That is not going to happen anymore. But what we've realized is that these islands are an added benefit to us. One of the things that probably folks in the room don't realize is when the Delta Conveyance used to be it was a twin tunnel project. And with that twin tunnel project, we were still worried about potentially earthquakes and stuff, but we knew that if an earthquake or a big flood happened, or we couldn't deal with this sea level rise, that we'd have that twin tunnel. Now it's been reduced to a single tunnel, which means that we now have to maintain, or we can't just pull out of the Delta. We can't just say Southern California is not going to invest. We really have to invest in the Delta. Some of those islands we have in the Delta are very critical to that, because we need to maintain what we call that freshwater pathway and those islands and securing the levees, reducing subsidence, doing some of the things you see here today are all a part of that.
Curt, you've done a lot of work on identifying the freshwater pathway. And so in light of that, what do you see as, I mean, this could be a fairly simple project. I mean, we're not digging, hundreds of miles of tunnels. What are major obstacles that you see to implementing a project of this type?
So in terms of restoring this, one of my favorite sayings is you got to begin with the end in mind. Yeah. So we need to have a vision, certainly, of where we're going to go. And Dr. Peter Moyle, who has retired, we call him the godfather of Delta Smelt, he wrote a book on the Sassoon Marsh, and he actually first put out this vision of restoring 50,000 acres. And so I always call it the Moyle Marsh. The idea that we could do this, but the obstacles for doing this, probably first and foremost, I think from the environmental standpoint, the environmentalists would look at this and say, tidal marsh is better than duck club. Managed marshes are good. Emily pointed out all the benefits, but tidal marshes are the holy grail. That is really what is the heart and the engine that provides this vast amount of food supply. The obstacles is we have a pretty well-heeled, well-funded set of duck hunters. These guys have $50,000 shotguns, so they're well-heeled. So the benefit, though, I think from our perspective, is many of the hunters are aging out. There's a demographic issue. Their levees are crumbling. They would like some more help dealing with their levees. They would like to continue to hunt. So my conversations, I used to manage the Sassoon Marsh program, is that we've got to find a way to work with the duck clubs. One of the ways that I'm exploring that seems to be acceptable to the duck clubs is we install big radio gates, at least initially, that it would allow us to flood and drain these important areas, accrue some of the salinity benefits, accrue some of the, not all, but we would accrue some of the ecosystem benefits. And they've indicated that that works for them. They could continue to shoot ducks. We could gain some of the benefits that I've described here. So the first and foremost obstacle is, always is, who owns the land, yeah, and how do you deal with the landowners? And so that is going to be the big one. The other, we're going to need to get, I'm hoping we can get some momentum around this project. We're going to need to get kind of an organizational structure. We're going to need to get funding to go start to deal with this. Metropolitan has funded all of the modeling with no help from anybody else to get us to this point of understanding what the project could do from a water supply standpoint. So we've got to get others involved. And that's why SFEI is great, by the way. This is an organization that's not political. They're rooted in science. They are great at bringing a whole bunch of stakeholders together. And so one of the things I did early on was to reach out to SFEI, and they've been a good partner to this point. But we're going to need that kind of collaboration, work with all the stakeholders.
Well, Emily, with that lead-in from Curt, what part is your organization going to play in this?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Curt, for the SFEI shout-out. So SFEI has been working for over 30 years in the estuary, and we have a long history of working on different large-scale restoration projects, like the South Bay Salt Pond project that I mentioned. And one of the things that immediately comes to mind is kind of thinking about the next step for bringing this vision forward is a series of bayland strategies that we've been working on in the north part of San Francisco Bay. So this is, to Curt's point, bringing people together, the stakeholders, the landowners, the community members who have a stake in the outcome, and working together to come up with a long-term vision. And what's cool about that trilogy of strategies in the North Bay is that it's happening. they're being implemented. So I just think that could be a great model for what comes next in Sassoon. Within the project that we just completed this year, one of the things that we developed is a landscape planning scenario tool, which sounds pretty nerdy because it kind of is. But it basically lets you engage and evaluate different restoration alternatives, exactly what we're talking about right here, and use that as a common set of information and data to talk with all of these people about what's the path ahead. So I think that could be a great, we have kind of the process, I think we have the reputation, we have the trust within the community, we have the tools to be able to start or be a part of a process, and I think we would welcome that.
Well, I think in light of the time here, because we want to set enough time for questions, I'm sure there will be, but based upon this new science that all three of you have discussed with us and shared with us today, and the looking back on all the other plans of one sort or another that we've had in and around the Delta in order to guarantee our water supply here in Southern California. What do you, and this is an open question to all three of you, what does your crystal balls show us? Will this move ahead, hopefully?
Well, I'm going to.
These are loaded, this is a loaded
loaded
question.
question.
I didn't discuss this question with them, but let's see how they do.
So I'm going to reflect Darcy on this answer. And Darcy's call to action, which she made, I mean, we've done some really good science, and I think I've laid out some really exciting opportunities. But until there's a degree of let's get this done, and people want to get this done, and people start to say, we've got to do this, it'll just languish along. So I'd like to see it move along before I retire. And
You're going to retire?
I got,
Well, there's a variety of ages represented
Yeah.
here, so yes.
I'll add a little bit to that. Some of the projects we do in the Bay Delta are big. Obviously, the Delta Conveyance Project has been going on since, before I was born. And, it involves a lot of people, a lot of organizations, even like Sites Reservoir, the same thing. This is a fairly simple project. You heard Curt said, we're not redoing the levees, we're just putting in a couple gates and flooding some land. That's it. And Emily and him have been working on the marsh for years. They know the people up there. Yes, as Emily said, it would be more than they're currently planned, but it's not like building a reservoir or putting a 40-foot diameter pipe underground for 30 miles. It's a fairly simple, from an engineering standpoint, project.
Yeah, I agree with some of the simplicity and the context of the other projects that are being talked about. And I guess another kind of point of context is that within the Bay Area, we have a goal of restoring 100,000 acres of tidal marsh. And right now, we're at just over half of that. And this project could be an absolute game changer. That could mean we could meet the goal, which right now is happening at small project by project basis. Will we eventually get there? Maybe. But this project, it could just totally move the needle. And especially if it is something that the whole state could potentially get behind. The barriers that do exist, particularly coordination with the community that's there, suddenly seems like it could be doable.
So for all of us here who are interested in Southern California water supply, in one respect, it comes up to duck hunting in the Sushin Marsh. Okay, I think that's a great takeaway for us. Okay, yes, Curt.
to Emily's point, which is, I have a good friend, Dr. Jeff Mount, retired professor at UC Davis, and one of the things he said a number of years ago, which I continue to say, is what we've done to date are a bunch of gardening projects. I mean, we've done maybe 5,000 acres here, 1,000 acres there, and if you look at a map of the Delta, you've got projects spread out. If you know anything about ecology and fish habitat, you need connectivity and you need scale. We need something that's connected. And doing a Sassoon Marsh project would provide connectivity and scale that is sorely missed from an aquatic. If you're a fish, you're not going to want to say, okay, I think there's habitat way over there. Maybe they don't know where the habitat's at. So we've got to create that connectivity and scale, and the marsh is the only place we can do that.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left. Someplace there's microphones, or somebody has a microphone. I can barely see hands, but we have a few minutes here for questions. So do we have
Nobody.
And you might identify, Darcy, okay. First hand up in the front.
Oh, there's one in the back.
Or is there one in the back? Okay, let's get the one in the back first. And please identify yourself so we know who you are. Because we can't see you from up here.
Sorry about that. Rick Erkeneff, South Coast Water District Director. I'm curious about the rate increases that Metropolitan will have to.
So this, related to this specific project, this is a conceptual proposal that we would bring to the Metropolitan Board. So we haven't gone over development of cost and anything of that nature. We do, like I said, have a process called this Camp for Water process, where we do bring projects to the Metropolitan Board. We're doing that specifically now. We work with the member agencies and others, and we analyze all that, not just the cost, but how does it affect greenhouse gases, reliability, all that type of stuff, water quality and stuff. So that's a whole process that we do have that we would bring. So we don't have any numbers on this. This is the answer to your question.
But I would add to that obviously this is a huge ecosystem project. And so the managers, the executives that I've talked to have said, this has got to come, there's got to be a significant public funding for doing this because there's a huge public benefit for the ecosystem. So it's bringing together different funding sources to be able to make this project happen.
So it wouldn't necessarily all be on Met's ratepayers'
No.
backs. Okay, already. Darcy, I think you're up. Okay.
Oh.
Well, it's always how much. And again, Darcy, you attend the meetings. There's a lot on our plate: pure water, sites, DCP, more. And I think where the board is right now is we have to, okay, what can we afford to do and in what time period can we afford to do them? Yeah, and when, exactly. So it's not if necessarily, although it's being interpreted as that. I think it's more when. We just don't, we are trying to be good stewards of your ratepayer dollars, and truly, and that doesn't necessarily mean we can put multiple, not even millions, but billions of dollars out in capital improvement, all at once. So we're, there's one thing about California water, it's never easy, right? Yes, Curt.
If I can indulge, this is something that I've indicated I'm very excited about. I'd be curious to see how many of you think this is a cool project and would like to maybe show of hands?
You want a show of hands?
Yeah.
Hey, that looks pretty good, although we don't have a dollar value associated with it yet. But I bet you it's going to be less than DCP or Sites Reservoir, or even pure water for that point. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
I guess there's some skeptics out there yet. So.
Well, but I think from the other Met directors that are here too, I think we appreciate sort of a show of hands because we're going to have to sell each other on this and certainly sell our member agencies on this.
I was just, Darcy, you had kind of a sub-question there of like how long? And that South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, so that's been in the works for decades and is projected to complete in 2050. And that's 15,000 acres of restoration. But one of the things I like about what Curt said is just thinking about a phased approach, piloting different things. Like, it's not like we're gonna make tidal marsh quickly. But I think having a strategy and a plan that has a phased approach, we could begin sooner rather than later.
And again, what this more assures us is water to Southern California. And I think that means that our moderator is going to take over here. So Fritz, you're back.
That was fantastic. I have a question. What would the floating marshes be made out of? Is that like an organic material or what?
So the beauty of this is, like I said, nature, I mean, the delta and the marsh historically had large floating marshes. And so what happens is this organic material, so let me start over. The tules that are the predominant plant vegetation, they grow and die, and what they do is they create layer upon layer of this highly organic peat soil, which is buoyant. And so if you allow nature to grow tules, it eventually creates these large mats of, we call them rhizomes, that once become, if they get unanchored, will pop up and float. And so what we're doing...
You have to ranch those somehow. You'd have to have an area of creation of those and then haul them into wherever you need them, right?
Yeah, so
I just thought it was a fascinating concept.
It is a fascinating...
Yeah.
One of the things we're doing on WebTract and Bolden Island is we're growing these. So what you could do, and they expand rapidly. Once you get them established, they're doubling in size every year or every 2 years. So once you get them, you would float them out, and then you have to contain them so they don't float away. But if you put them on an island, a subsided island or a leveed island, they would be contained within a levee and would continue to expand and grow. And it's basically the native tule plant.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's
like
hear
one
it
in my
for our
pool.
guests today.
Give them a big round of applause. Nice job, guys.